Hey there, this is Chris and Eli with Landlord Gurus. Thanks for joining us again today. Today we are going to continue talking about the process of finding a new tenant for your rental once your old tenant has moved out. And before we talked about the steps that you take to get your place cleaned and get ready for listings. And the next thing that we're going to talk about today is having a rental criteria. Even before you start showing it to new tenants or new applicants, it's important to have a set of criteria that you know what you're looking for and that you can communicate to potential applicants so that they know what to expect. So having a checklist is a great way to do it. We have a sample checklist on our site that we'll put a link in this video so you can download one for yourselves and you can see what we are including in our checklists. And in some cases, like where we are in Seattle here, we're required to have a checklist and we're required to show this checklist to anyone coming to view the apartment and anyone interested in it. So so we'll just get right into it and we'll kind of go through the general topics that we have in our checklists and then kind of discuss some of the things that we look for within each section. So so I think the first thing that we have in our checklist is just sort of general criteria. Eli, we sort of talk about questions about whether they've received an application, whether they provide ID, things like that. Why is that important?
Yeah. So the general criteria I'm using are, did you complete an application? Do I have everything I need to start, which includes all of the rental references, history, employment history, personal data, and a copy of government issued ID with photo. And I collect some kind of employment documentation, a W-2, a pay stub, income statement of some kind, and it'll depend on the person. But that's important because it's important for the tenants to know what they have to do up front in order to be considered a viable applicant. So I go off of our checklist. I know, we'll talk about some of the things that you do that are in addition to that, but that's what falls under the general criteria for me.
Right. Yeah. This is to let them know up front, like you said, what sort of things they're going to need to submit along with their application so that they're not taken by surprise and so that they have an idea of the things that as landlords, what we're looking for specifically. And we can get into what those specifics are, as we proceed through the checklist.
Yeah. And it could be a huge waste of time if you get applications that don't have all the information that you're going to require. The applicant can fill it out and pay for a screening report, and you can take your time looking at it and corresponding with them. And when it will come to nothing. So it just saves everybody a lot of time. And just to touch real quickly on a prior topic, which is to have a few questions that you ask as pre-screening questions before you ever get to the application. So for me, that's smoking, pets, income, and move-in date. So touch on that.
So at this point, so the applicant or the potential applicant has already been asked those questions by you, and they have responded in such a way that you're willing to proceed further, and that you would be showing the place to them and potentially accepting an application.
Exactly. Yep.
And another good point about having, telling them what you need up front is if they submit an application but have not submitted certain parts of it, like they didn't upload their pay stubs or they didn't know that they were supposed to do that kind of thing, then it just delays that application process even further. Then you're waiting, you're going back and forth, and then you're waiting for them to get their documentation in order and upload to you. And meanwhile, you could be losing other potential applicants while you're waiting. So it's a good idea to have to let them know what's expected, so all that's there up front when they're ready to apply.
Exactly. Yep.
And then so next in our criteria checklist, we talk about rental history. So have they provided a certain amount of rental history, how many years of rental history that that you think is important.
I asked for 3 years.
3 years or 2 years or whatever it is. And that's the thing with this checklist is a lot of these specifics you can alter
Yeah.
to fit, whatever you think is more important. In some cases, some landlords might want to see, 3 or 4 years. Some are okay with seeing only 1 year rental history.
And in practice, I get a lot of applicants who have spent some of that 3 years living at home.
Right.
Or in some kind of an informal arrangement. So I don't say that I have to have the records for 3 years and it has to only have been, a rental situation. I just require the history. And I do say at least one landlord who can be reached as a reference, because I rely fairly heavily on being able to reach references, somebody who you can just get a sense from about what it's like to deal with this person.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, good. We also look for things like whether they've got prior evictions, whether they've received complaints from other residents, landlords, or property managers, things like that. And again, you can alter that to see, for what's important to you. But for us, yeah, I want to know if that applicant has been a good tenant or not. So like you said, getting landlord references, things like that.
Yeah. And I do specify that I want to be able to reach 2 references, and that can be a combination, if rental references aren't available, of an employment reference, sometimes personal, although that's subject to kind of fudging on their part, so I don't like to, but I like to, that's my standard that I communicate, is that I like to have two references. So.
Yeah, and then it's kind of along the lines of when you're checking those references. Are you're asking those previous landlords about whether they were they had complaints against them, or whether they paid their rent on time. Did they take care of the property and abide by the terms of the rental agreement? Things like that are things that I look for when I'm checking on their rental history.
Right. I mean, I don't think you do it, but I've got a set of questions that I communicate to the applicant that I am going to ask their rental references. So they include, I call them, financial obligations. I don't just say rent, because it can be utilities and fees of some kind. It could be late fees, for example. So I leave that somewhat general. Yeah, complaints from tenants or neighbors or past property managers. I do ask about whether or not they have pets or smoking, or they're smokers, so that I can verify whether what they're telling me on the application is accurate. Any illegal activity? Did they leave the property in good condition? Kind of a standard is, would you rent to the applicant again? I ask that. I think it's kind of silly, because well, the answer I always get is, well, it depends. Which is basically what I'd say. So I kind of understand that, but that's the gist of the questions that I ask.
Right. Well, I've had some prior landlords, answer that question like, absolutely yes, or in a heartbeat.
Yes.
So it does say good things. They can say good things about it.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so we've looked at their rental history, and then we move on to their income requirements.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where we lay out, this is what I do tell all applicants as well, is, what kind of income requirements we're looking for, whether that's, a certain multiple of what the rent is. Like in my case, I require at least 3 times rent, income to rent ratio, at least 3.
Mm-hmm. And that's gross. That's gross income, right?
What's that?
You use gross income.
I use gross income.
Yeah. Yeah. So do I.
Yeah. I ask, has the applicant been employed continuously, the past, again, X number of years, whether it's 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, if not, what are the circumstances? I'm not really, again, like you said, I'm not requiring them to have been continuously employed in that period of time, but I want to know, yes, or if not, then what the circumstances would be.
That touches on something that's where there's a judgment call. Like in Seattle, we are required to tell, as part of our advertising, potential tenants, potential applicants, what the criteria are for acceptance. So that if not why question, I think is good practice, but in general, I'm not sure about it in Seattle.
And so you might need to say, that the applicant has been employed continuously for the past 12 months or something like that. So you might need to come up with a hard deadline for something like that.
Right. Which I don't like to do because I want to give applicants who have gone off and traveled, done something interesting and enriching, an opportunity.
Right.
Just the same, and not have to discriminate against that. That's the problem with all these rules. But, people make them with good intentions, but there are issues around them. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
Ratio, though, you do a debt to income ratio standard, right? And I do things a little differently, but how do you do that?
So you can have along with a credit score requirement, which we'll talk about, and that's our next section. But when you talk about income to debt ratio, you're looking for, a income of at least, whatever, it's 2.5 times your debt or 3 times your debt, things like that. So that are your monthly debt payments, I guess, right? So that what, that they've got enough money left over after they paid off all their other obligations, that there's still money left over for rent. Ideally, and I've emphasized this to some tenants, is rent comes first,
Right.
Ideally, and then your other debt obligations. But obviously, that's a choice that each person has to make on their own.
Yeah, I approach it a little differently, although I think maybe I like your approach better. I may change, but what I say, and I say it as a pre-screening question, I say, do you make at least 2.5 times the rent after any significant debt payments? But so that leaves it subjective. Your way of doing it is objective. Do you have what it is, a 25% or lower?
So a debt to income ratio,
debt to income, right,
did not exceed 20%.
That's a calculation. I do think that's easier and less prone to problems. So, that I think I may convert how I do that.
I also ask for pay stubs. I want to see, and this is, they can upload this with their applications, but I'd like to see at least 2 months of prior pay stubs. Some people ask for more, but and if they don't have pay stubs, then tax returns or bank statements, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Do you contact employer references?
I do. I contact their current employer just to verify, and again, some employers are more forthcoming than others, some, make you go through their HR departments, and all they will do is verify that the person is actually working there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to know that what they've told me as far as where they're working, whether it's full-time or part-time, or roughly how much they're earning, whether it's a monthly wage or hourly wage or salary. That what they've told me is true and correct.
Right. And most employers will answer, is this correct type question. Right. So that's the way I do it too. And usually what I say about the income level is, I say, so-and-so has told me that their income level is in this ballpark. It is this amount, is that in the ballpark? And most times an employer will answer that question. So, and that gives you what you need to know.
Right.
So,
yeah. And then, like we mentioned, we want to see credit reports as well. And so that comes with the application process. I use a third-party screening service where the applicant will fill out the application online and pay the screening service themselves. In my case, I use Apply Connect. I know, Eli, you've used Avail and you like to use Avail.
Yeah.
But, they all do the same thing, right? They ask for certain information. They verify that the information is, to the best of their, the applicant's knowledge is correct. And then they submit it, and, in minutes or, whatever, we get results.
Mm-hmm.
So and part of that is their credit report, either through TransUnion or Experian or one of the major credit bureaus. but in the criteria checklist, yeah, I specify what that credit score minimum needs to be. And that's one thing that, again, is sort of one of those hard numbers, hard and fast numbers that they got to meet that minimum in order to proceed.
Yeah.
So in my case, generally I set that at 620, depending on the property.
And you decided on that because you talked to a friend who's a mortgage broker.
Yeah, I talked to a mortgage broker.
What it means, right?
Yeah, to a lender, and he spends all day, every day, looking at credit reports, and in his opinion, that 620 was a number where if you're below it, be careful. If you're above it, generally pretty good qualifications. Yeah, so that's the number I use, but again, anyone can you can change that to whatever you like.
Yeah, I set mine at 650. Again, sometimes I'd like to be able to accept somebody who's lower. Higher is great, but sometimes there are people who got out of school, the income or the student loans hit like a ton of bricks. And they had a while before they were on their feet with employment that would cover those costs. And so it's nice to be able to be subjective, but increasingly we have to be objective, and that's why we pick a number.
Yeah, exactly. And along the same line in the credit report, I believe they'll show if you've had evictions or bankruptcies or anything like that. So I do say no evictions, no prior evictions. Bankruptcies, I believe, stay on the record for 7 years. It's one of those things that there may be mitigating circumstances, but in some cases, particularly in Seattle, where you have to have that minimum criteria, and if they don't pass that, if you lower your criteria for one person, I think the rule is you got to lower it for everybody, and then you kind of have to. If you've had previous applicants that you've denied, then you would have to go back and offer them the opportunity to apply with the new criteria. Yeah,
that's explicit here. They talk about how you have to do that. So not every place is as restrictive, but there are more and more regulations everywhere. There's a growth in landlord tenant regulations.
Yeah, and because of that, then it's really important to have that criteria really thought through in advance. So that when it does come time, when people are pushing those limits on your criteria or not meeting the criteria, that what you have to do.
Yeah.
What the ramifications are, I guess. So
yeah, I include that no more than 3 late payments in the last 3 years. I mean, things happen here and there. Late payments that actually make it to a credit report are not a good sign, because generally there's a grace period in there. But and I also require that they be up to date at the point that they're applying. I don't like to see being in arrears, being behind on payments, right? As they're applying. So I want to see that things are going the right way.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Maybe they've made mistakes in the past, but they're beyond that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Next in our rental criteria checklist, we do have a section on criminal history, criminal criteria. And that's a sticky one. Here in Seattle, we cannot check for that at all. And the beauty of using these third-party systems, the ones that specifically say that they are valid for every state and every local jurisdiction. So in my case, when I use Apply Connect, they don't even check, but they don't even show me what the criminal history is.
Same with a bail.
Yeah. So we can't ask. And so we don't want to know.
Yeah. If you don't get it, nobody can accuse you of using it.
Right. Exactly.
So which is actually now the criteria. In Seattle, you can get it, but you can't consider it.
Right.
So but what we do get is sex offender history.
Sure.
You're allowed to use that as a criteria. So I think that's the only case that where you can use criminal history as a factor.
Right. Okay. But yeah, if you're in a place that does allow for looking at criminal histories and allows you to make judgment based on their criminal history, that's that's a section that you would include in your criteria checklist, and you would outline what things, I guess, are
Right.
acceptable to you and what things are not. Whether it's it's okay if you got a misdemeanor
Right.
versus a felony, or whether it's whatever
Open
you deem
container.
as acceptable criminal history and what's not.
Tricky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, be clear and explicit on what that is.
Mhm.
And then lastly, we've got sort of a general other criteria. And you touched on this before, Eli, about asking about pets. We've talked about how many residents are allowed to live in the unit.
Mhm.
And again, some places have rules about that. But or if you've got your own rules about how many people you will accept in a one bedroom, for example.
Yeah, like here we don't get to dictate an occupancy level. So what I say is that the occupants must be less than or equal to the maximum number allowed. So, which is a lot here. Probably other places will allow you to dictate how many, but we can't do that.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. I also say, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, other questions in this category, I ask, does the applicant smoke? I even go on to ask, was the applicant on time for all scheduled appointments? Because that means a lot to me. If they're prompt or if they respect my time,
right,
or not. And so, I can have that in the criteria. If they're a no-show when we've scheduled a time to show the place and they don't even show, or they don't call or let me know they're going to be late or whatever, and then they come back around, a week later and apply, I think I've got it explicitly stated that you were a no-show without any advanced warning, that you will not be considered.
Right. I think it's a good objective way of doing things. And I do make a note that it's being late or without notifying me. No show's a no show, and that's not okay. So some people say, did you take your shoes off when you got there? Yeah, I've heard people use that one. I don't use it because I don't always do it, and it's not necessary all the time. So
right.
But
along those lines, I've heard people say, ask, did they follow all stated rules and regulations? If your building has, signs posted, no parking, even signs, and they park in a no parking spot. Whatever. That can say things about that individual. So
you can do yourself out of any qualified tenants if you're not careful, though.
Yeah, exactly.
If you get too picky, if you say no, did they take their shoes off, and they didn't, then they're disqualified. You can shoot yourself in the foot.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So again, like with anything else in this criteria checklist, it's all, you can modify any of it to your own stated preferences. But again, it's important to think it through and know what you're looking for and what is a disqualification in your book.
Right.
And then once you've come up with that, and you can change that, maybe this time around, you stated a credit score of 620 and you didn't get very many applicants. And next time around at your next vacancy, you change that to 600 or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's something that you can constantly adjust, for each future vacancy. Mm-hmm. But it's important to have it, to think it through, and then to use it and follow it. Protect yourself from any claims of discrimination, and to not allow yourself to get fooled by a good story or someone who's got a lot of charisma that can convince you of why this and why that.
It makes your life simpler.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. One note on the kind of the other criteria, you touched on no smokers. And that it's a tricky one because the sometimes leases or applications, I guess the application usually says, are you a smoker? Right. But then smoking addenda often say no smoking on site. So I try to be extra clear, both in pre-screening as well as the application process. And Avail lets you customize both pre-screening questions as well as questions on the application, which I like. So I say, do you smoke in any substance in any form? So, I'll go on to say, including vaping. And, because I don't want people who are wiggling. Oh,
Right.
I only smoke outside. So, and we'll get into it another time. I've got this going on right now, and I'm trying to figure out how to navigate it. So, tricky.
Yeah, it's tricky. And again, yeah, you're right. So if you can outline all that up front, and your expectations are clear, and your own, expectations of yourself are clear, so that you know what's acceptable to you, what's not in advance, then it does make it hopefully a little bit easier down the road when someone does try and pull something, or if they try and get around something, that you've got it explicitly stated.
Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's basically the gist of our rental criteria checklist. It sort of outlines the major things that we're looking for, and then comes up with specific qualifications and specific minimum criteria that you need to look at, and that the applicant knows up front as well.
Yeah. Streamlines things, makes for better decisions, and more transparency for everyone. I think makes things run smoother.
Yep. Yeah, so that's where we are with this video. And in the future, next ones we'll then talk about when you do receive that application, and your screening reports, and how you go about accepting or denying applicants, and as we continue along getting your apartment filled. So check back again, subscribe to this channel, and you'll be notified when the next video comes up, and share it.
Yeah, thanks for watching. See you next time.
Bye.